Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Ikumi Kawamata, and I come from Japan. I'm a social work major here at Gallaudet, and I'm in my senior year. I am incredibly honored to be here and welcome our two very special presenters who have traveled an incredibly long way from South Africa to participate in our celebration of the Deaf President Now anniversary. We know that this semester we have had a lot of events to celebrate DPN, and through all of these events we've learned a great deal about what transpired during that protest, and we've also been able to recognize how important the event was for our deaf community. We know that the event impacted the deaf history here in the United States, and we also know that it impacted the life of deaf people throughout the world. The world looked towards Gallaudet and that movement. The world together claimed that deaf people can do whatever they intend to do. The world together stood up for the rights of deaf people all over the globe. It's a perfect ending to have these two speakers with us today, offering that international perspective. The names of our two presenters is our Honorable Wilma Newhoudt-Druchen, and this is how we sign her name. Oh, so sorry, I didn't do that quite right. And our second presenter is Bruno Druchen. First, let me tell you who Wilma is. She is a graduate of Gallaudet. She graduated in 1992. She also got her graduate degree in social work right here on this campus. She went back to South Africa as an advocate and making sure that deaf people had access to services in Cape Town, South Africa. She became the director of the South Africa Deaf Federation, and later she became the president of that organization. She is now a member of the Parliament, and she's serving her third term as a Parliament member. In that capacity, she is responsible for the Committee for Youth, Children, and Disabled People, to make sure the quality of lives improve for them. Now she serves as a vice president for the World Federation of the Deaf, and she's also a board member of the World Federation of the Deaf. She has received innumerable awards, including Doctorate of Law, an honorary Doctorate of Law degree from Gallaudet, as well as others. Welcome, welcome, Wilma. Please come to the stage. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Gallaudet. I am very happy to be here. I really am honored to be here again at Gallaudet. And thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry that Dr. Weiner isn't able to join us this afternoon because he's the one who wrote the letter of invitation. And I wanted to thank him personally for that. He wrote it to me in November of last year, and I, of course, responded affirmatively. Now, I hadn't really looked at the actual topic until time came a little bit closer, and I knew that I was coming here for this presentation, and I looked at what I was being asked to present about. And I looked a little closer at what the topic of today is, and I wondered to myself how it was I could approach that. Normally in South Africa, you know, I'll do some research and I'll explain about these different terms, I'll make some definitions and so forth. But when I was thinking about coming to Gallaudet and Gallaudet University, I knew I didn't need to do that. I knew that you all can look up terms and you can figure out the definition on your own. So I thought I should take a different approach. Here we are in the 25th anniversary of Deaf President Now. With that, I thought that I should take an approach that really ties together all of these events and makes it clear how they are related, okay? Okay, here's an example. In order to understand today, you have to understand yesterday. And that means if you want to understand today, you have to understand history. History is very important. The history of the Deaf President Now movement is very important. And we must never forget that history. This is how I sign history, if you see that sign, okay? Again, remember how important it was, how important it is. You know, I've made a lot of presentations around civil rights and human rights and the Bill of Rights, and we have all sorts of iterations of what are rights. Why do we have these things? Why have these events taken place? Why is it so important we have these types of declarations and documents? Why was it so important for us to have the movement called DPN? I don't have the answer. You have the answer, especially since those of you who are here. Now, when we talk to our children and youth, you have to understand the movement so you can teach them about that. You have to explain to them why these things happened. So I came to Gallaudet in 1988, which means that I missed the protest just by a hair. It happened in March, and I came in August. So I missed it just by a few months. But that doesn't mean we didn't know what was going on here. We absolutely knew. The protest was televised there, and we all saw you marching. I want to tell you, I came from South Africa, and if you remember at the time, apartheid was part of that canvas of the country. Okay, so I came here at the age of 24. Now remember, most of you come to college when you're 17 and 18, so I came as an older student. And I remember it was my second semester, I was sitting in a history class. And the professor was Dr. Joe Kinner. And I looked around the class at my classmates, and it seemed like I had perhaps said something wrong by what I was seeing. Now remember, I was coming from apartheid, where black people were very oppressed, and laws absolutely supported that. So they were talking about the history of the world. And I happen to love history, and I love, in particular, the French Revolution and the protest that took place. Now, we have to think about why that protest took place, and hold on to that for just a second, okay? Now, also think about Russia. They engaged in a protest, and we need to understand why that happened. Remember, communism was part of that picture. So there I was in my class in 1988, and Kinner smiled at my comment, and the other students had a less positive response when I talked about communism. And I had to explain that I didn't necessarily support communism per se, but I did support people fighting for their rights and fighting against oppression, just like the French Revolution. These people were poor, and they needed to fight against that. And then China is another example, and there's a lot of example of oppression there. Mao was the leader, and they were forced to follow through oppressive tactics. And it wasn't so much about philosophy as much as it was about fighting oppression. So that's why I supported any of those movements. Okay, here, again, fighting oppression, an uprising, a protest. We have to ask ourselves, why did these happen? And for DPN, we have to ask ourselves why it happened. It happened because deaf people were oppressed for years and years and years, and it was time to resist. That is something we have to remember. So sometimes people look at the protests that are happening throughout the world and they think that they're silly or invaluable. But you cannot make that kind of assessment without knowing why those types of protests happened. Poverty, in and of itself, is a cause for these types of protests over and over again, and we have to understand what's behind that. Some people don't like unions, worker unions, you know. But again, why do we have those unions? The unions are important. They are the organizations that fight back, stand up, and protest for the rights of people. Was DPN important to us? Yes or no? Absolutely. It was hugely significant, regardless of the fact that it happened 25 years ago. We have to remember its importance and its significance. I already mentioned the French Revolution and a number of these other movements or revolutions. And again, we need to not just look at the face of these movements. We have to look very closely at what caused them and what were some of the complaints. When every revolution starts, there's people coming together. And they're thinking about how to stop war or how to stop oppression or how to make sure that workers have rights or children have rights or migrants have rights and that people have freedom. Okay, so often these conversations start with the government. But they're not the ones who really take action. It's the people. It's the grassroots. It's the American people. It's the South African people. It's these people who developed the conventions. Now, for me, in my country, does my country accept these conventions? Does my Congress ratify this or not? If not, we need to say why. Conventions about rights of children, are they ratified? What about people with disabilities? And then is it signed or is it ratified? When it's ratified, it has more power. If it's signed, it's nice for show, but it doesn't really have teeth. When it is ratified, we know it can be enforced. So my country has adopted these. Okay? You need to know that. So the World Federation of the Deaf. I am honored to see a former president of the WFD right here in our audience today. A great honor. So who is the World Federation of the Deaf? And why do we need them? And what are they about? What are they for? Why do they even exist? And how is it that WFD works? WFD does very important work. They go out to government officials, they speak to them in person, they knock on their doors, they have arguments and debates and try to get them to understand our plight. And that's WFD. They have done incredible work. You know, government officials don't really understand the experience of deafness. They don't really understand why deaf children need to go to a special school, or especially why a deaf girl would need to go to school in my country. So we need to explain these things. We need to talk about our sign language and why it's important and how it's important. And we need to explain why it is that we don't use American Sign Language. We need to help people understand our experience and our culture and how we are oppressed in particular. Again, who is WFD? These are the board members. And the board members hail from all over the world. This gentleman is from Nepal. He's a teacher. This person is from the United States and also Norway. He's from England, the UK. He used to be involved with media. This gentleman's from Turkey. Bosnia. Yeah, Bosnia. Mexico. Finland. Norway. Russia. And this is the WFD president from Australia. So you can see how they come from all parts of the world, and we're able to share our experiences with each other. We're able to work together to get our governments to adopt these conventions that will support the well-being of deaf people. Again, I speak of history. Why is history so important? I want to be sure that my children and my children's children and the generations after them understand our history, that they understand deaf history, that they understand that the fights that took place to get us where we are. And books that document history offer such value to us. So WFD serves a certain group of people. In our world, we have 6 billion people. From that 6 billion, there are 72 million deaf people. And the board really likes to remind us that we represent 72 million people. And he says, please dress appropriately, because you represent a lot of people and you never know when you might be representing in front of some very important people and or government officials. Okay, so of those 72 million people throughout our world, 80% of them live in developing countries. 80% are living in developing countries. That means that, in addition, only 17% of that 72 million are receiving an education. You know, we always hear that Gallaudet is the cream of the crop. I find this a little bit weird, you know. That's what they say, right? That's true. You all have access to education, and you should really understand how important that is. And really remember that there are a lot of deaf children out there who do not have education. So when you get your education here, you're responsible to go out there and make sure as many other deaf and hard of hearing children can do the same. When I was young, I didn't have education. Government officials thought that it wasn't important. A deaf young child, they thought it was an absolute waste of money. And there are many governments who still think that way. So I entreat you, when this celebration is over, don't stop your work. Continue your work, especially in the area of education. And only 3% of that 72 million are bilingual, which means they're getting accessible education. Okay, and I repeat, a Gallaudet is the cream of the crop. It is. Education is so valuable. You know, I have hearing children, and I tell them, the education for deaf people is not nearly as good as it is for you. And I tell them I had to work really hard, and I continue to work hard to elevate education for deaf children. And I know that deaf children don't read the same as my hearing children do. So again, only 3% are bilingual and receiving education through sign language. This is so important. Government officials do not understand this. They don't understand any of this, and it's upon us to make sure that they do. Even when they change every year or two, we have to explain it again and again and again, and our work continues, and our work is cyclical. So once again, when the celebration is over, our work is not. And the inspiration that came from the protests must continue. So we know that WFD is an international organization. Some of the things that they do is hold conferences and workshops. Every year we have a full conference and we host it. And then we plan the next 4 years. This is the vision of WFD. Deaf people have full human rights in an equal world where they and their sign languages are protected and included as part of human diversity. This is emphasized for us because the world does not see us as equal yet. They do not see sign language as equal to spoken language yet. Society does not see us as an equal citizen. So we must uphold this vision and share this vision. Can you imagine if we were able to accomplish this mission? But that's essentially what it is a real joining of all deaf peoples throughout the world. And this is our mission in words. The World Federation of the Deaf promotes and advances the human rights of deaf people through cooperation with the United Nations and its agencies, national organizations of deaf people, and other partners and affiliates. So this is why I mentioned those conventions. WFD needs to be familiar with the conventions that are out there and how to take advantage of them to boost the rights of a deaf child. The Millennium Goals, are deaf people mentioned in them? The WHO recently put out a statement that was oppressive to deaf people, and it was the World Federation of the Deaf who stepped into that process and asked them to revise it. We couldn't step in and insist on it. We had to go in and make some recommendations. This is the World Health Organization, okay? UNESCO, okay? We had to step in and help them understand. So we do a lot of this. And we have to understand the role of these people who play in the international fields. So we have four primary goals for our next 4 years. International human rights advocacy. And this is everywhere. When we go to a board meeting, we meet government officials there, and we take the opportunity to advocate there and explain and educate, help them understand what's available within their area, who they're responsible for. Human rights training activities. We look for funds from human rights organizations and then use that to teach throughout the countries. We recently added a human rights official who happens to be deaf. We want to make sure that any information we get is shared at UN meetings to make sure that we're all communicating with each other and have the same information. Our fourth goal is to strengthen the Federation. We are not a rich organization. We need your support. We need your financial support so that we can do the work that we want to do. We only receive funds from the Finnish government at this time. So we are really looking towards other countries to help support us. For when I attend meetings for the board, WFD doesn't pay for that. It's the South African Federation that pays for it. And that's the case with the other board members too, that those meetings and the travel for that is not funded by the World Federation, but by the member organizations of individual nations. These meetings happen twice a year, okay? Of course, when we're there, we take advantage of building leadership and doing education and advocacy. It can be wearisome, but other times it's completely inspirational. We know that we can develop our community further. Some of you know this, but I have adapted it for the human rights perspective. Okay, this is really visual. Any information that we get, we need to make sure that it's done visually and that it's done in sign language. Deaf people need a visual language. We all know that. We also know that access is often provided through interpreters, but the government does not understand why they need a whole nother body sometimes and a whole nother 2 bodies in the room to make access happen. And we are responsible to go to government officials and make sure they do understand why we need that. Bilingualism or multilingualism, or however you say that, you know, whether you have one or many languages. We know that we need to make all languages work so that deaf people can get access to information and knowledge, regardless of how the language plays out. WFD is very focused on accessibility, and we are working with other disabled organizations within our nations and other nations to break down any barriers to access. WFD works very closely with the International Disability Alliance, and if at any reason a WFD representative can't go, somebody from the ISD does go, and we work very, very closely with them and with other disabled organizations. I'm not going to go into each of these articles with you. I just want to highlight. There's a few conventions that are very significant. These 5 listed here specifically mention sign language. We worked very hard for 8 years to get the language in these articles, and they're here. We succeeded. There were 8 ad hoc meetings attended by a number of nations, and they did advocacy work as well, and we succeeded. Article 2, the definition. Article 9, accessibility. These terms are in these conventions. Article 21, freedom of expression and opinion. Article 24, related to education, which of course is of primary import to us. And then Article 30, entertainment, cultural life, recreation, access to movies, theater, and whatnot. So the first step was for the government to sign off on it, but signing it is not enough. It doesn't really give power to these documents. So I go back to my country to implement it, and it needs to be ratified, and it's only when it is ratified that it has the type of power that we're after. And let me explain to you how that happens in South Africa. So we have the president with the staff, ministerial staff like you, Secretary of State and so forth. And that's within the president's office. And the staff is the one who attended those meetings. Then when the conventions were done and we had a final draft, and the government needs to sign off on it, and the ministers and the president, the ambassadors also need to sign off on it. And then that letter is sent to Parliament. And it's the Speaker of the Parliament House that reads the letter and considers which committee the letter should then be referred to. The letter was sent to my committee. I was the chair of that in 2004 to 2009. So we received this letter saying that we needed to consider this convention. The committee did adopt the convention after discussing it for some time. We invited a human rights official, because we do have a human rights office in South Africa, so we invited an official from them, and we wanted them to understand why this was important. We also invited the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. We work very closely with them. You know, anytime there's an international treaty or convention, they're very much involved. And they will want to know why we're doing the work that we are doing, and they work very closely with the president. We would also invite the public and get their response on how whether they see it as a positive or a negative. Then the committee reconvenes. We decide whether it's important enough to adopt. Once we do that, it goes to Parliament. From there, it goes out to opposition parties to see if they would be in support of it. And then the Speaker calls me up to read the declaration. It's a short statement. It goes out, and then Parliament will say whether they vote, oppose, support, all in support. Nobody opposed it, by the way, and it was ratified. And then we get a letter that goes off to the minister, and that happened in 2007, and it was ratified and effective. But that was just the beginning. We were very happy it was ratified, and it was certainly something we could celebrate, but we had to ask ourselves what comes next. In my position, I needed to call people in, the president needed to call staff in and take a look at the convention and ask ourselves if it would become a disability law or another type of law or another type of law. Depending on what the law is, it goes into different categories of law. So that was a whole nother layer of conversation for us. One advantage is I'm sitting in Parliament, I can say, hey, I want to use our public, whatever means you have to communicate with the public. And if I were to say that the UN Convention ratified this in 2007, but you're opposing this now, why are you doing so? And they realized that they lost the argument, and they did need to provide captioning for the televised Parliament meetings. So again, government officials don't even have to be there for ratification, but we do have to use the conventions and help them understand what they're responsible for. There's a Child Act that was signed in 2005, and there was a convention, and that was in the act. And although it was related to deaf people, it's a very complex process, and we have all these departments coming in presenting to each other. So we can use these conventions and these processes. It's a powerful tool once they're ratified. And I would really encourage all of you to ratify your conventions. I know you have laws. I know you have the ADA. Is it a strong law, though? Do you need conventions? I personally think you do. I always say that you do. And the reason for that is because we have varied governments all over the world that continue to look to the states for leadership. And if nothing is taking place here, then they don't feel like they have anything that they need to do. I beg of you. I beg of you. If it means another DPN and another protest, do so. Please ratify all of your conventions. You know, the protest happened many years ago. And you don't have to tell me why the protest happened, but the work isn't done. The world needs America. They do look to the states. DPN happened 25 years ago. What's happening now? We need to focus on these conventions. And they can apply to so many things. And I look to you to do that in the future. And I'm hoping that we'll see that in the near future. Now, there are many countries who are in the process of signing and ratifying their conventions. Let me give you some of that information. So 130 ratifications. 130. And we have 155 signatories. So that's work in process for ratification. This is one of the most important human rights conventions ever drafted. We needed 20 to implement the work, and we got 20 instantly, as you can see. We have 130. And 155 signatories. So that does mean that there is more work, and all of these countries need to ratify these conventions. And WFD is working very hard at doing so by providing workshops and educating people and advocating. In Australia, they're doing this. You know, our original members all over the world are doing this work so that we can really understand that. Some of this stuff is really complicated to read. Some of these conventions are not optional provisions because the optional provisions actually force reporting to UN. So there are some folks who avoid that. So you want to sign and ratify, not do one or the other. Okay. So it's very important that you do both. This is my question to you. What is today? What is tomorrow? It has been 25 years. And soon we'll be celebrating the 150th birthday of Gallaudet, maybe with some more ratifications. I leave this question with you. The world is looking towards you, and we are looking towards each other. Maybe Russia or Norway will have deaf leaders in place. But again, I entreat you as leaders to ratify and force the government to do what they need to do. You have to take that responsibility. So let me hand the floor over to Bruno, and then we'll take questions after he's done with his presentation, okay?
Thank you, Wilma, for sharing such incredible information with us. Next, we'd like to invite Bruno Druchen, who is currently the National Director of the Deaf Federation of South Africa. He's also got a long history of association with the World Federation of the Deaf, organizing the Congress, the WFD expert groups on accessibility and technology. He's also had a great role in lobbying for language rights of South African countries, long advocated to have African Sign Language as an official language, revised tax laws in South Africa for deaf people to deduct medical and interpreter expenses. Please welcome Bruno. Okay, I just want to make sure everything is set with the interpreters. And first, I'd like to open, as I always do, Viva. And it means long life. This is the sign. Viva. Follow me. Viva. Viva Gallaudet. Viva Dr. Hurwitz. Viva DPN. Beautiful. So everyone understands this. Viva. And viva to Vicki Hurwitz, the First Lady. So anytime you see me sharing this, it's very important to recognize the impact of Deaf President Now. I remember 25 years ago watching the events of DPN on television. An inspiring experience for myself watching this. Watching the students and the faculty and the community members protesting, that became a lifelong inspiration for me. And it was one that I held very close to my heart. And it continues to remain in my heart and has become an impetus for all of my work. We need to always remember, recognize, and honor those who were a part of the movement 25 years ago. And the movement was so important because it recognized the oppression that deaf people were experiencing. And it became a catalyst for change. It created a very strong community here at Gallaudet. And Deaf President Now not only impacted the United States, but for all of us across the world. Those in China, Japan, Europe, South Africa. You all should be proud. And so this is why I open with Viva. Viva DPN. And I use that and I share that example when I speak with those who can hear. A lot of hearing people and that's incredible that you all have DPN and you have that experience from which to work. And we share this experience with those in other worlds, other countries, to know that they have this opportunity as well. So we're proud supporters of DPN. So I'd like to share with you how DPN has made an impact in South Africa. So when we talk about civil rights are protections and privileges given to all citizens by law. For those who are experiencing any oppression, laws are then created to protect them. I'd like to share a little bit of history of South Africa. We initially had a South African National Council for the Deaf. And that was in 1929, which was run by a group of hearing people. There were no deaf members at that time. And at that time, it was the apartheid, and they became a council for the deaf. And the perspective was that deaf people wouldn't be able to represent themselves. And it was their own apartheid in the deaf community. Fast forward to 1979. We had the first deaf executive member. Then in 1981, it was still predominantly run by hearing members. In 1988 is the Deaf President Now movement. It was a movement that shook the world. And it became a catalyst for other movements across the world, including South Africa. And those of you in America had a great impact on the deaf communities across the world. And in South Africa, we gathered as a community. We have 12 different languages that we communicate with in our regions. We all gathered and developed the skills and the experience and the pride that we needed to create change in our own provinces. But I don't know that South Africa was ready for that. We went out into the communities. We provided deaf culture workshops. We asked for changes in what types of rights were given to us. And we were able to do this because those of you in the Deaf President Now movement planted the seeds for us. And then we finally had our first deaf chairperson in 1990. So from 1929 to 1990, the council was administered by hearing people. And we finally protested that and demanded that we have a council run by deaf people. And we then had the first deaf national director, just like you all did at DPN. So we have 12 different languages. We have interpreters for each language. And so when we have councils, we have 12 interpreters working. And in 1997, we had our first congregation of all of these representatives. Where our Deaf Association in South Africa was born. We now have adapted our languages so that we rely and share one language. Then in 1997, we met with the World Federation of the Deaf, and we learned leadership skills and were able to continue our movements from there. During that time of the apartheid, the government marginalized black people as well as deaf people. And because of that, we were never able to make it to the WFD. And in 1999, we were finally able to attend. And that was also when we demanded that 90% of the people who were working in our council in South Africa were deaf. So we had the appropriate representation of deaf people on our council. And that's when we were able to join the World Federation of the Deaf. There have been a lot of changes since 1994. We also created laws for equity between men and women. From 1929 until 2007, we always had male deaf leaders of the Deaf Council. And finally, in 2007, we had our first female chairperson. And that was Wilma. So DPN made a significant impact on all of these events that occurred in South Africa. This is some of the history of deaf education in South Africa. In 1863, we had the first programs taught in sign language by Irish nuns. And then we move on to 1880, where there was the adoption of oralism in the schools. People thought that was a good idea, and that sign language was not. Because then we can learn how to communicate like the mainstream society. Then in 1881, we had the first white deaf school established. And at that time, there were no deaf black schools. And it wasn't until 1941 that we finally had the first school for the black deaf established. So we had these schools established, but other schools for the hearing in 1976 had their own protest because the language that was enforced in mainstream schools were that of the Dutch. And hearing students in the mainstream schools had their own protest and demanded their own language be used in the classrooms. Then in 1984, the medium of education changed from the native tongue to English. Here you see Deaf President Now on the timeline. And as a result of that, those of us in our own deaf community fought for the right of having sign language as a means of instruction for our deaf children. So at that time, there was a movement against using oralism in the schools of the deaf. And there were 42 deaf schools involved in that protest. And now in South Africa, it is recognized that we use South African Sign Language. And DPN was the catalyst for all of this. So you see this banner here that says, "Deaf education system must change now." And those ideas initially came from the work here at Gallaudet from the Deaf President Now movement. And we made these demands in the deaf education system, and we were honored and given the changes that we needed. And we thank you for doing that work in DPN so that we could also apply such changes in South Africa. And here I share some other international positions in sign language and deaf education. There's 1993, the UN Convention, 1994, Salamanca Statement. In 1995, we have the World Federation of the Deaf working together for the rights of deaf people and deaf education. In 1996, South Africa made significant strides. And I'm not going to go through this entire list, but I would like to share with you the South African Constitution. The Sign Language Act was a part of it. In 1997, that was where when we had our protest. And that was where in those 9 provinces, like you have the 50 states here in America, we have the 9 provinces that made a huge push for change in the human rights of deaf people. And that the human rights of deaf people must be equal to those of hearing people. And that means instruction happens in sign language in the schools. And that education for deaf people are just as important for education of hearing people. So that protest in 1997 became the impetus for a lot of change thereon after. 2003, we had a deaf march, a deaf education march. You know, it was impossible then at that point for government officials to resist any of our requests. They knew that our community had grown strong and that we would not accept them sitting down to having a nice cup of tea and having discussion. And so we believed in our coalition, and having this coalition would create the power that we needed to make such change, so that we could provide a better education for all future generations of deaf children. So it took us a long time to become a member of the WFD. And we finally became members. And we were able then to host the WFD in 2001. It was an incredible experience for those, 2011. It was an incredible experience for those in South Africa, and not only South Africa, but in all countries of Africa. And often those in African countries don't have access and also had a difficult time even attending the WFD because of visa issues. But we managed to have a large congregation there. We shared ideas, we shared cultural heritages. And it was there that we became a global community. So it became a rich contribution to global prosperity. As Wilma had talked about before, in terms of human rights, and we have the Deaf Federation in South Africa, and we use these human rights instruments as a way to lead our work. We're still very busy. We're still working to make changes, including creating sign language as an official language for deaf people. So we have the Parliament, the Constitution. We look for issues of equal justice and equal rights. We want to ensure that these rights are included in the UN conventions, and we're still working now on making sign language an official language. In the past, there was a lot of resistance to listening to our views, but now there seems to be much more transparency and more willingness to establish sign language as an official language, as well as all of these other human rights requests. And we try to teach the government that we need to have equity in our Constitution and our laws that include deaf people. And we have to advocate for the fact that these laws are not equal for those of us in the deaf community. And certainly, we cannot forget our youth. You know, Gallaudet had created a relationship between the Nippon Foundation in Japan, and we used that as a model to set up our own WDL, World Deaf Leadership Programs. We've had those of you from Gallaudet come and present and lead workshops on leadership skills. We've had Jordan and Kubi, Joe Kinner, myself, Wilma, and other team members work collaboratively to develop this program so that we can then, in turn, develop our youth. And when those of you who come from Gallaudet leave, we continue the work. We share the skills of leadership and knowledge with our youth. We give them the skills that they, in turn, need to become leaders themselves and to be successful citizens. And still today, we share the legacy of DPN. We even share the story of the 4 deaf student leaders, so that our youth know that they are able to do the same thing, to fight for their rights, so that they can be successful in their own right. We focus on women, youth, and the Open Society for initiatives for South Africa. So these are several different areas that we work in, and we teach. We teach skills, we teach leadership skills. And again, all of this wouldn't have been possible without the experience that we had from Deaf President Now. I have traveled across the world, and people always ask me, is South Africa a country? And is Nigeria a part of South Africa, or are they separate? And so I just wanted to show you a map of where I live. This is South Africa. And these are the 9 provinces. And we have deaf organizations now in all of the 9 provinces. And this is where we have the different areas and offices of Deaf South Africa. So these are the key focus areas that we work with in South Africa. So we actually revised them just recently. We had focus areas in the past, but they became quite outdated. So we focus now on South African Sign Language, deaf education, accessibility, and empowerment. We ensure that these focus areas are in line with the conventions, the UN conventions. So this will be what we focus on in our work for the next 4 years. So we have different programs. We have associations that focus on different areas, women, youth. Sometimes they have a social focus, which is the SAW training that you see here. And then we also have ECD, that's early childhood education or early childhood development. So you see all of these programs link back directly to the UN conventions. So we're always looking at the progress that we're making in South Africa. We are continuously communicating with the many different provinces in our space, in our areas, to ensure that we're able to make progress in all of these different focus areas and the conventions. What we have learned from WFD, we then share to our community members and regional associations so that they can continue to fight for the human rights of deaf people. So Nelson Mandela made a statement that I have posted here. We often keep this at the forefront of our minds as we work. It's important to remember that the fight continues. The work never ends. It's a long journey. It's hard work. But we see the progress. And our work continues. This concludes my presentation. And before I leave the stage, I just want to say Viva Gallaudet, Viva DPN, Viva the First Lady, Viva Gallaudet President, Viva to my International Sign Language interpreter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Truly amazing for us to understand how DPN has impacted the world. Your outstanding leadership has contributed to that. Looking at bilingual education, we know we need to make progress and inroads in that area all over the world. We do, we planned for a Q&A, but we really have very little time, so we're going to have just 2 or 3 questions. So we'll take 2 or 3 right now, and you can line up. Our speakers are willing to stay for informal Q&As after the 2 or 3. Is this an okay place? What an outstanding presentation. Outstanding and powerful. Really so grateful for you being here. I have a couple of questions for both of you. When you talk about the COPD, the conventions for people with disabilities, and it has not been ratified in the States. And one of the biggest problems here is political, and it is the oral factions. In particular, A.G. Bell is a very strong lobby against ratification. You know, they're proponents of oralism, and they have strong alliances with cochlear implants corporations. So do other countries have these same types of bodies? And if you do, how do you fight against them? How do you get ratification going? What's your advice to us here in America? What's your advice to Gallaudet about how it could be more active in getting things ratified? Thank you very much, again, to both of you for that. I'm the government, so you should ask the lobbyist how he lobbies, okay? Thank you. As I said before, policy is like weather. You know, it changes all the time. Sun one day, rain the next. The first thing you have to do is take the first step. And what you need to do here in the States, you need to know who are your allies in the House. You know, are they Democrats or are they Republicans? I'm not talking about oral, not oral, okay? And the reason is because there might be philosophical conflicts, and we're not sure it's worth working all that out. So at first, just understand, is it the Democrats or the Republicans who are more likely to be in support with you? And then call in a meeting, okay? And meet a lot. You know, it takes years, possibly, 1 or 2 years. It's not a single meeting. Now remember that policy doesn't have time for you to just say, oh, I want my rights because I'm a deaf person. It's not like that, okay? You need to go in there, you need to talk, and you need to talk again, and you need to advocate, and you need to convince people, and you need to talk with the staff people for the other folks who don't have enough time to give you time to talk with you. You need to build a whole foundation and a network, and then you'll get the support that you want. You know, you think about all the things that you need to think about, the code of this is besides the point. In South Africa, the way we work was, the first thing that we did was talk with the ANC. We did have teas with them, and we did get them to understand our cause. And then we went to all kinds of disability groups, and all disability groups need to work with each other. People out there need to support us in the work. With that kind of support, then you are able to advocate, and you are able to succeed. If I could add to that, on an international level, 8 meetings, okay? WFD was there, IDA was there, the International Alliance of Disabilities was there, other international organizations were there, other associations who had done a lot of work out there, and they had signed and ratified. Lots of officiants were there. But I don't know that there was a representative from America, from the government or anybody. Was anybody there from the United States? I don't think so. It's all about access, okay? Where is access? And it's important that the disabled groups work together, and when you have those kinds of alliances, you can get these laws passed. At that initial meeting, the government officials came in to talk with all these groups of disabilities. We could all hash it out right there, whether we agreed with it or disagreed with it. We could hash out terms if we wanted to, but we were all together. Government officials were there, the disability community was there, and that process has to take place. Thank you. We'll take one last question. Yes?
Thank you for your presentation. It was inspiring. You know, I like your analogy with, you know, the sneeze heard across the world. And, you know, I feel like here in America, we only sneeze once. And I would like for there to be some more of that. And what could that be? What could that look like, though? And you know that fish, you know, live in water, they don't even realize that they're living in water until they've actually come outside of the water and they can see that they're actually living in water. And so often I feel that we're doing that here. We're living in a fishbowl. So what, from your perspective, do you see that we could do to make some more further change?
You know, here in the States, you have countless opportunity. Right here on this campus is a wonderful example of that. And then Gallaudet itself provides you to yet more opportunities to visit other countries. A lot of our children have never seen educated deaf adults. So they need to see you, they need to see me, they need to know that they have a path that they can follow. Gallaudet offers all of those opportunities. And remember, you are all part of that small 3% who has real access to education. Now, when you talk about a catalyst or a sneeze, there's lots of different ways to do that. There's building awareness. You have these celebrations that are taking place. Sessions around deaf awareness are very minimal. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there's enough of that. Seminars or weeks of deaf people. We used to have a week, now we have a whole month because we've recognized that schools are closed or there are holidays and it's just not a month, so enough. So we have a full month to celebrate the heritage of deaf people. That's one of the tools that we use. And that needs to be done here too. And not just in one place, but everywhere. I could sit here and list a number of ideas, but the Gallaudet president is sitting right there, and he may wonder where all the money is coming from for all these wonderful ideas. So, instead of doing that, it is true that DPN was a powerful catalyst, and I expect all of you to think about how to continue that. I do. And I expect you to do so for the future generations of deaf children. And as Wilma said, there needs to be more consciousness raising, and not just here in the States. As WFD grows, we need to continue that. We need to pass on the legacy of DPN. And the National Deaf Associations and Black Deaf Advocates. You have a number of organizations right here. You have organizations for women. They all need to work together and continue to get the word out there. If new people come in, that's fine. We all have to work together. We go to the conferences, continue to get the word out there, and eventually we will succeed. And eventually we will create a better world for deaf people. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Viva! Viva DPN! I can see that other folks have some questions, but I'm so sorry we are out of time, so we're going to officially close for today. Thank you for taking those long trips to be with us, and thank you to the audience, and a special thank you to Dr. Greenwald for organizing all of these special events. And anybody else who has supported this event, I want to thank you as well. Again, if you have more questions, our speakers have agreed to stay, and we'll be happy to address them.